Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending the webinar today. I'm Melissa Schwartz, and I'm the manager of the education team here at TrainingPeaks. And today we have Nell Stephenson, and Nell is presenting on the Paleo lifestyle. So this is a topic that we often get questions about, and so we're very, very excited to have Nell today and go through her information and her lifestyle in this presentation. So just a couple things before we get started, and I hand it over to her. If you have a question as Nell is going through all her information, go ahead and submit it in the little question area of the GoTo control panel. Please don't save your question to the very end. Myself and Kelly Steuven, we're going to be collecting the questions, and we're going to be having Nell answer them at the end. So it's a lot easier if you guys just ask the questions as you have them, and we'll line them up, and Nell will be able to answer as many as she can in the time we have left. Also, we will have this recorded, and it will be up on YouTube. So you'll receive an email from TrainingPeaks in a day or so, and it will have that recorded link to it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Nell.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody, to give a little bit more insight about what the paleo diet really is and what it isn't, and how it can help us as athletes, as well as those of us who might be just recreational exercisers. So I wanted to just share a little bit about myself first. I have been paleo since 2005. I had always what I thought was a pretty healthy lifestyle, and I talk about this in my book. I was raised by a hippie mom, so I had lots of fresh veggies, fresh fruit, raw dairy, lots of grains, nothing processed, but I was certainly eating things that I later found out were actually doing me harm, even though I thought they were healthy. I've been paleo since about 2005, and a little bit about my background. I studied exercise phys at USC. I got my degree in exercise physiology, and I have my personal training certification from the American College of Sports Medicine. After that, I actually attended culinary school just to kind of round out my service offerings and to have a better menu to offer to clients, so that now I can present them with how to move and how to eat properly, and also how to prepare that food in a healthy way. My sport side of things, I've been racing triathlon since '98. Started out doing the sprint distance, and shortly thereafter moved to Ironman, and I've been racing long ever since. I've had the amazing opportunity to work directly with Dr. Cordain, who is the father of the paleo diet. And I think without his research and work, we probably wouldn't know much about it. So I always really like to point out that it's been an amazing opportunity to work with him. We started out working together doing a newsletter, and I co-authored the Paleo Diet Cookbook with him a couple of years later, which I think really opened the door for me to finally have my own book last year, which was called Paleoista. So I think we're ready for the next slide. So let's start with the basics. What is paleo? It is literally the diet we were born to eat. It's a really common sense way of eating. Sometimes when I talk about paleo, people are a little bit shocked, and they'll think it's some crazy radical diet. When they hear the idea of not eating any grain, any dairy, or any legumes, they think it's just going to be really difficult, really confining, really boring, really impossible to eat in a social situation. And none of those things are true. It's a really just common sense way of eating. And I find that sometimes, depending on who I'm speaking to, leaving the word paleo out can actually be helpful. Because if you present it in a way such that you're just telling people to eat a balance of healthy, fresh vegetables, fruit, wild proteins, and unrefined fats, nobody can really argue with that as being a good way of eating. And it is the way that we were genetically meant to be eating. It's the way our ancestors ate, and they didn't have a lot of the modern day illnesses and diseases we see today, which are largely a part of eating things that we're really not meant to be eating, and in my opinion, sometimes aren't even food, because there's nothing nutritious left at the end of the day. There are no grains, no dairy, no legumes, and no refined sugar in the paleo diet. But it is a very balanced diet, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But about 40% of the carbohydrates are coming from complex carbohydrate sources like local fresh vegetables and fruit. 30% of the calories are coming from natural fats like extra virgin olive oil, avocados, and coconut oil, and then the rest of the remaining 30% comes from primarily lean proteins, but also some fatty proteins then are in order. But things like wild salmon, grass-fed meats, free-range poultry, eggs, all of those kinds of things really round out the balance of the beautiful offerings that paleo has. Basically, nothing's in a wrapper. So if you want to look at it, another really simple way of looking at if something's paleo or not, and there are more products coming onto the market these days that are paleo-friendly, but generally speaking, we're going to be heading towards fresh as much as possible and packaged, processed cans and so on as little as possible. And then sometimes when people think it's, again, they think that there's a challenge behind it or that it might not be healthy or there's not enough research behind it. That's actually not true. And there's several prominent scientists and researchers who've done a lot of work. And again, I mentioned Dr. Cordain, but also the work of Dr. S. Boyd Eaton, the Drs. Eads, Rob Wolf, who studied directly under Loren Cordain. There is a lot of evidence behind why this is a good way to eat. So if anybody's curious about there not being any validity to it, there actually is quite a bit. And ready for the next? So why should we eat this way? Well, the benefits are literally endless. As I mentioned before, many of the modern illnesses that we have today are linked to eating food that are unnatural to our bodies. If we eat real food, like I presented on the slide, and we omit the non-foods, it really leads to optimal health. Some of the many benefits include improved skin conditions, weight loss, reduced to completely elimination of migraine headaches, joint pain, chronic fatigue, energy levels are improved, sleep is improved, insulin sensitivity is improved. Often I work with clients who are just on the border of being prescribed a medicine because their doctor has told them that they've got to lose weight or they're going to have to take high blood pressure medication or high cholesterol medication. And by changing their diet and starting to move a little bit, they're often able to sidestep that and correct everything just by eating properly rather than having to take a pill, which is nice because often when you just go to a pill and don't change your lifestyle, you are basically putting a Band-Aid on a situation and the cause is not going away. So it's probably going to get worse. And then the medications continue. Side effects from the medications often require you to take more medications, and then it just starts to dig a very deep hole for yourself. So it's actually better, in my opinion, if you address what you're eating first before you go straight down the road of taking medications and pills. And I also want to mention, too, for the purposes of this conversation, that weight loss is, for us, it becomes also a performance issue. If you're starting to race and you find that you're not getting to that lean weight you want, a lot of times, and again, we'll get into this a little bit later as far as the misconceptions, but it is not the case that just because you're racing marathons or racing Ironman that you can just eat whatever you want. Sure, we can get away with it more so than somebody who's sedentary, but that's actually not a good reason to treat your body like a garbage can and just pile in the junk. It's actually better if you just continue on with the clean fuel. Again, in a very common sense way of looking at it, if you're eating a natural, real food, it's the best way to give your body the most clean burning fuel without any of the junk. And if the paleo diet is followed properly, it's almost impossible not to reach your lean ideal body weight, but it's done so in a slow and steady manner, so it's not sort of a quick fix, gimmicky approach to weight loss, which will leave you with low energy and a feeling that you can't wait until this diet with an end point is over so you can return to the bad eating habits that might have made you overweight in the first place. Next slide, please. So who is this type of eating suited for? I often joke, but I'm not really joking, and I say it's suited for anybody who's human and also for most mammals. And that's true. It doesn't matter if you're an athlete, not an athlete, a man or a woman, how old you are, how young you are, how fit you are. It's really beneficial for everybody. Interestingly enough, and I only learned this little tidbit of information within the last couple of years, but women, including those who are about to become pregnant, those who are pregnant, and those who just had their first baby or second or third, actually will benefit tremendously from eating this way. I learned recently that often lactation specialists are told to counsel new moms to go to the caveman diet because often babies who are colicky or who are having a difficult time breastfeeding are doing so because they know so early on that they're having an issue with gluten or dairy or soy or peanuts or some of the other really common allergens that are common in most diets, but they're not, none of them are part of paleo. So often women have traditionally been recommended to follow the caveman diet. The problem, however, has been they've been, and I've been told this by a couple of clients who were literally just given a list of foods to avoid. And it was presented in such a way that it seemed radical and extreme and not doable. So some of them, unfortunately, made the decision to simply stop breastfeeding because the babies would not, they just were having such difficulty rather than following a diet which seems so restrictive, which is quite unfortunate. But it's interesting to note that eating this way will support everybody, even the moms, even the infants. And again, it doesn't matter how, I bring up the point about it being suited for students. So even if you're on a budget, this is doable. Sure, it would be nice if we could buy everything organic from the farmer's market or from the local Whole Foods. However, even if that's not a reality for you, it's still something that you can do. And then busy executives traveling. I always use my husband as an example, who's got a crazy schedule, but he still manages to make good decisions. So it's just a matter of being educated and being aware and having it be important to you to make good choices all the time, regardless of where you might be. Oh, sorry, next slide.
Slide, and I know there's quite a bit of delay on when I turn it. Is that the slide you want to be on?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. Next, I wanted to move on to some common misconceptions because there are a lot. I mentioned before people joking about it being, paleo, eating dinosaurs and that type of thing, and it's actually the wrong era. So it's not about eating dinosaurs. It's not about only eating raw meat. Certainly, if you want to eat raw meat, you can, but that's not the only way to go. First, I wanted to touch on the paleo diet being compared to the Atkins diet. It's not. There are some things that are similar, and there are portions of the Atkins diet that I agree with in the sense of trying to control your blood sugar by eating properly. However, eating paleo is not all about eating copious amounts of processed fat and meats all day long, such as the idea of eating bacon and cheese and that type of thing. That's not what it's about. It's actually a very balanced diet. As I mentioned before, the macronutrient ratio is roughly about 40-30-30 in favor of complex unrefined carbohydrates, and again, the remaining 60% evenly divided out between lean protein and natural fats. The next pointer is that the paleo diet is a high-fat diet. And again, it's not high-fat. It's higher than what the current MyPlate recommendation is, which in some cases is as low as 15% of the diet coming from fat. And paleo, again, is closer to about 30% from fat. So it's higher fat, but there's lots of research to show why eating a diet that has a bit more good fat, such as that which we find in fish oil, coconut oil, avocado, wild salmon, that type of thing, is so beneficial for not just to make us feel more satiated during any given meal, but also for brain function. And there's links to increased fish oil consumption being helpful in cases of lots of mental issues such as depression and anxiety. It's just, there's endless benefits to having a higher percentage of the diet coming from those good fats. And again, I stress the word good. It's not a message that we need to eat more French fries or anything like that. It's to focus on good fat. And I also want to touch on, when under that umbrella of fat, nuts are part of the paleo diet, but they're not the main source of fat in the paleo diet. And the reason for that is all nuts inherently are very high in omega-6s, which are inflammatory, and low in omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory. So that doesn't mean you can never eat nuts. It just means they should be seen more of a garnish versus a main source of fat. And if you had a handful of raw walnuts on a salad, at some point during that day, you would just want to make sure that you had some nice wild salmon to balance out that 3 to 6 omega ratio. A no-carb diet, that's another thing that's an often misconception of the paleo diet. And it's not no carb, it's lower, especially for us endurance athletes. It's a certainly lower recommendation than what we're force-fed through the media, the idea that we need to eat tons and tons of sports bars and energy bars and all these processed things. It just isn't the case. We actually can source all of our energy to prepare for a workout or recover from a workout from natural starches like yam or sweet potato, depending on where you live in the world. So the idea that you need to have big pasta and all these other refined grains isn't necessarily accurate. Another one that's really interesting is people saying that the paleo diet doesn't have enough fiber. And the concern is, well, how am I going to be regular? I'm concerned about my digestion if I don't continue to eat my fortified grain cereal. And the reality is that fresh vegetables have about 7 to 10 times the amount of dietary fiber that refined grain products have. So if you're doing paleo diet properly, then digestion shouldn't be an issue. On the flip side, if you have the misconception in pointer number 1 that paleo was the same as Atkins, then you might have some issues, because if you are eating nothing but protein and fat, then things would definitely get stopped up a little bit. Another interesting misconception is the idea that there's not enough calcium in the diet because we've taken away the dairy. Well, the interesting thing with dairy is, although there is quite a bit of calcium in a cup of milk, for example, there's about 250 milligrams, and you might compare that to a cup of spinach, which has about 225. You might think that the milk is a better option. However, the problem is that that dairy is very acidic, even more so than meat. So when we eat something so acidic, our body pH changes, and we need to buffer that pH to return to alkalinity, and we do so by extracting calcium from the bones. So in actuality, if you're a regular milk drinker, you're setting yourself up down the path for osteopenia and eventually osteoporosis, which is why it's better to choose something like a cup of spinach, which is very alkaline. So at the end of the day, you're net positive calcium versus net negative. And then finally, the idea that the paleo diet doesn't support athletes. Sometimes people will sort of be skeptical, and then they'll say, okay, well, I buy it, but what if you're active? There's no way that you can go long and if you're eating this way. And that's actually not the reality either. As I mentioned, I use myself as an example, as well as many clients I've worked with. You don't have to eat all the refined stuff if you want to be a successful endurance athlete. And I definitely want everybody to really to just stress that and bring that home. It's just not the reality. I'm ready for the next. And then next, we're all a sort of a quick fix minded society, and we want results immediately. And so depending on your reasons for going paleo, you may actually see results quite quickly. Clients who are, or people who are starting paleo because they have acne or rosacea or skin allergies or that type of thing, often they go paleo because they're at their wit's end and they've been to the dermatologist many times and they've had all kinds of creams and ointments and antibiotics, and their skin continues to look not the way they want it to look. But the nice thing is that skin cells turn over so quickly that you may very possibly start seeing results in a matter of days. So that type of person who goes paleo for their skin is more likely to stick with it than somebody who's going into it for other reasons just because of the results starting to happen so quickly. Weight loss can be seen in the first few weeks depending on how much weight somebody has to lose. Of course, if you've got somebody who's got a lot of weight to lose, they will be more likely to lose significant amounts of weight more quickly than somebody who is just trying to lose that last 5 pounds. But slow but steady is the weight loss. With paleo, it might be 1/4 pound a week, it might be 1/2 pound a week. However, it's done in such a healthful manner that it will stay off if paleo is continued. In neurological diseases like multiple sclerosis, different autoimmune conditions, it might take longer to see the results simply because neurological tissue doesn't turn over as quickly as skin cells. So that could be a bit frustrating to somebody who's got to wait years to see changes. However, I have actually also had the opportunity to work with several clients who have gone paleo for autoimmune reasons. One client had been paleo for about a year when I met her. Previously, she had tried a vegan diet when she first got her MS diagnosis. And when she went into her neurologist to have her MRI for diagnosis, she would go every year for a follow-up. And unfortunately, she found that the sclerotic plaques in her brain were actually growing in number and in size when she was vegan. When she found the paleo diet, the number of sclerotic plaques stopped increasing, and she has not had any increase in the number of plaques since, which I find really amazing and further evidence that it's such a beneficial way to eat, and even in diseases as severe as MS can be. And the last pointer is that I wanted everybody to be aware that it is normal to have a short-lived period of sluggishness while your body is adapting to this diet, but I'm talking about a couple of days. For me, it happened in week 2 or week 3 where I sort of felt a little bit low energy and sort of questioning, maybe this isn't going to work, maybe I do need a little bit of rice or something like that. But I saw it through, and I've never had an issue since. What's not acceptable is the idea of walking around being so starving that you feel like you're going to pass out. That's not the point of paleo, and that's not normal. If you're feeling that way, you're probably not eating enough, and you need to pile on a little bit more vegetables and some more salmon. Next slide. Paleo athlete. And again, this is probably going to get into the crux of what most people on the call are interested in. The macronutrient ratio changes around training. Again, when we're eating a meal that is not before or after a workout, it's going to be roughly 40-30-30. In training, it changes. If we're talking about an endurance workout, it's roughly 4-to-1 carbohydrate to protein for longer sessions. Fasted training can also be indicated for shorter sets, depending on what somebody's goal is. And this is something that's a very personal decision. Sometimes you might find that you can get up first thing in the morning and go to the treadmill and run for an hour without having eaten first, and you feel great, have your breakfast afterwards, and you feel energized. Other people might find that they feel dizzy and uncomfortable and way too hungry. If that's the case, I wouldn't recommend training that way, because you certainly don't want to do something that makes you feel like you're at risk for something happening. You can build your way up to it, though. I would also not suggest going from your normal training regime right into doing a hour bike ride on a Saturday without having eaten breakfast first. So it's for strength, current research is showing that going into a strength workout, either fasted or just having had a small protein-only meal, about 45 to an hour before the workout, and doing the same thing afterwards, is looking like that's the best way to get the body to release the maximal amount of human growth hormone, which is going to be very important in workout and recovery. So that's something to keep in mind too. Timing and balance of eating is so important too. Most athletes that I've worked with far under fuel. One woman said she had just done a marathon and she had one gel during the race. So I wanted to also touch on the topic of gels. Are gels paleo? No, in a word, they're not. And I'm always quite candid about that being the one thing in my own diet, as well as what I share with other clients who are racing long course, is that we do need, when we're out there for the long haul, we do need a source of carbohydrate. And the bottom line is that right now there is not a paleo-friendly carbohydrate gel on the market. I wish there were. I wish honey would work. It's actually not the right type of sugar to have by itself all day long during an Ironman. So for the moment, I am using a carbohydrate gel for when I'm racing, and that's what I also suggest for my clients. And other than that, I don't have anything non-paleo in my diet, and that's the approach that I find has worked really well, and I suggest clients do the same thing. As far as how much we need, I usually recommend the rule of thumb, which some of you may be familiar with, which is roughly 4 calories per kilogram of body weight per hour of endurance exercise for training sessions lasting upwards of 90 minutes. And that doesn't mean that you never need a gel if you're doing a workout less than 90 minutes. It just means that the interval is going to be shorter. And you might find you need a little bit more. You might find you need a little bit less. But I find that keeping it simple has really been what's done the trick for me for several years during Ironman and marathoning, and not having to worry about GI distress, not having to worry about, am I going to have a bar, am I going to have a block, am I going to have a this or that. Just keeping it super simple really minimizes the thinking and just really dials it in so that you don't have to worry about that one more thing during race day. Paleo foods, supplements, sports nutrition products, are they necessary? Again, in my opinion, I have found that the gels work really well for the long haul, being the only exception for everything else being paleo. Rest and recovery is so important. And the recovery shake that I like to use is a recipe that I found in the book by Dr. Cordain with Joe Friel called The Paleo Diet for Athletes. It's called Homebrew, and I like it for several reasons. For one, it's really cheap because you're making it yourself. And it's variable because you can change the type of fruit that you use in the recovery drink. It's a mixture of a high glycemic fruit like banana, protein coming from egg, and glucose. And then you can use a pinch of salt. Salt is actually part of the paleo diet for athletes. You wouldn't want salt in the diet if you're sedentary, but because we're out there sweating all day, it's actually important that we do add some salt back in. So that's an important little distinction between paleo for athletes versus paleo for somebody who might not be an athlete. Also wanted to touch on timing and balance of eating, which is something that people get incorrect very often. And the idea of just being familiar with what the glycemic index of different foods is, especially in the fruit realm. A lot of people will say, well, some paleo interpretations say that you shouldn't have fruit, and some say that you should. What's the deal? And the bottom line is some fruit, most of the carbohydrates that you're eating come from vegetables, and then add some fruit in, but most of it should be vegetables. And then the exception is right around the workout time when you want to gear more towards a higher glycemic, sweeter fruit like bananas and that type of thing, compared to you wouldn't want to have a big bowl of broccoli right before you go to a track workout. And then the last thing, the idea of can't I just eat whatever I want since I'm an athlete? I'm sure all of you have heard this uttered many a time, but it always kind of surprises me when I hear people saying that they think that because they're exercising several hours a day and expending several hundred to several thousand calories of a day, that that's somehow a good reason to ingest all kinds of junk from all kinds of sources, which to me seems sort of like the opposite thing that you would want to do, because your body's just performed for you, and then you're going to inflict all this stuff upon it that it's not going to be able to process, and it might even make it sick and acidic. So I think for the most part it's actually better to obviously go paleo and just really think about what you're eating. And if you're somebody who's performing at a high level, even though you are eating junk, you might think, well, I can get away with it. But my challenge to you in that situation is, well, how would you, if you're doing this well and you're eating junk, imagine how much better you would do if you weren't eating junk. So that's something to think about too. Moving along to deciding when to go paleo. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case that just because it's New Year's Day, it's time for you to go paleo, or it's your birthday, or somebody else is going paleo. It is a big change. It's a positive lifestyle change, but it is a huge change. So my best recommendation is to always determine when you are personally ready. For some, it might be a case of deciding, seeing a photo of yourself and realizing that things have really gotten out of hand and you're not comfortable at the weight you're at, or maybe you're finding that your race performance is really being hindered, you're getting more injuries because you are carrying a little bit of extra weight or something like that, or maybe you're like me and you're at your wit's end and tired of having a stomach ache every single day for your entire life and are ready to figure out what the heck you're eating that's causing that. So find when you personally are ready to do it. And then you want to choose the time of least stress to increase the chances of success. So in other words, if you're just about to move, if you're just about to start a new job, if you're just about to take a trip around the world, those are all really stressful times. Good possibly, but still stressful. So choose a time when you're going to be able to make the most likelihood of success for yourself and the least likely chance of failure. So really, really think about that before you give it a go. And then factoring in for racing for athletes, again, if you have a race next weekend, I wouldn't say that necessarily that today is a good day to start paleo, but just look at your schedule throughout the year and give yourself some time to get used to it, because again, you wouldn't want to schedule a race right after you've gone paleo and it happens to occur in that time window I mentioned earlier when you feel a little bit tired. So scheduling ahead of time is really important. And next slide. So how should you go paleo? Does it have to be all or nothing tomorrow, or can you ease yourself into it? And I found that clients usually tend to have one of two types of personalities. Type A, which admittedly, that's me, and you sort of want to do an all or nothing and no holds bars, immediately I'm going full paleo. That's fine. Or you might be more of the approach where you want to say, you know what, it sounds like a big change. I want to do it, but I don't think I could do it all right away, so I want to ease myself into it. So you might say, I'm going to make some steps for myself. The first week I'm going to give up dairy. The next week I'm going to give up grain. The next week I'm going to give up legumes, and so on. The important thing is that you get to a point where you will be following the paleo diet at 100% for at least a month. And the reason I think it's important to do it for a month is you really need to give your body, for lack of a better word, a chance to detox. I know it sounds so cliche, but even if you got a little bit of the foods in your diet that you're allergic to or intolerant to that you might not even be aware of, a little bit is still enough to create the inflammation and the negative reactions. So for me, when I cut out gluten, if I had just reduced gluten and went from eating some type of gluten every day to just a couple of times a week, that would have been enough time to keep the symptoms going on. And it's not a fair trial for paleo for yourself, but it's also not really a fair statement to say for paleo in general, because if you do it half-heartedly and then you feel it's not doing anything and then you broadcast paleo doesn't work, it's not really an accurate assessment. So I really, really think it's the best situation to go for a month, and then you can test things. You can decide after a month of paleo, you can go ahead and have that ice cream and test it, see how you feel. You might find you can't believe how sweet it is. You can't believe that you've woken up with a breakout on your face and your stomach is bloated. And you might realize that those things happen and decide it's worth it. You might find that you go back and have that piece of pizza that you used to love and you've got a horrible stomach ache from the gluten. So you test things and see how you personally react, and you might find that there are certain foods that you can eat now and then and you don't feel too badly, and that is your decision that it's worth it or not. And that's what Dr. Cordain refers to in his book, The Paleo Diet, the idea that you can be 85% paleo or 90% paleo. And of course, I would love it if everybody would be 100% paleo, because I just think everyone would be the healthiest that way. However, at least if you're familiar with it and you've given it a try, you have the opportunity to decide to go paleo, and at least you've got the education. And I'm definitely a fan of testing out different ways of eating. I was vegan myself for 2 years before I was paleo, and I always like to share that because I find a lot of athletes reach out to me because they're struggling with some of the same things I did, and they want to find another way to eat, but they struggle with the ethical component of being vegan and wanting to deciding they want to eat animal protein again. So that's a bit of a tangent, but the idea is you want to find different ways of eating and see what works for you and see what makes you feel the best. And again, just determining what level you prefer. You don't have to say to yourself that I have to either be 100% paleo or not paleo at all. It's a matter of fine-tuning what works the best for you. And next slide. Completing your own trifecta. And this is something I mentioned in Paleoista, which is a book, again, that came out last May. I find that if you have a 3-step program, which is actually a service I offer to clients locally in Los Angeles, but you can easily do it yourself. The first step being a kitchen makeover or a kitchen clean out. And all you need to do is go through the kitchen and get rid of everything that's not paleo. And it's pretty common sense, but the bottom line is if you don't have a quart of ice cream calling your name from the freezer or a box of crackers beckoning to you from the cabinet, if it's not in the house, you're going to be far less likely to eat it. So go through and get rid of everything. Non-perishable items can always be donated to the local food bank if you prefer to do that versus throwing them in the garbage. But the idea is to just get your house completely paleo, so the one place that you're in the most often won't be tempting you with things. And then the next, after you've cleaned out the kitchen, the next step is to go to do a healthy grocery store field trip or a farmer's market or wherever you do your grocery shopping. But this is something that will become hopefully a weekly habit. And go in with a plan, choose your vegetables and your proteins and your fruit. And again, you can start very simply. You might say initially you're going to do 3 of each. And then you come home and do the third part, which is an hour in the kitchen. And in that 1 hour, done twice a week, you can prepare enough food to last yourself, as well as your family, spouse, roommate, kids, whoever might be, a couple of days. So you've got that hour in the kitchen where you have a pot of water and you steam a couple of batches of veggies. The oven's on, you bake a couple of proteins, maybe some chicken, maybe some fish, maybe you marinate some beef for the next day. Wash your whole pieces of fruit, spin your lettuce and your leaves dry. So at the end of the 1 hour, you've got a kitchen full of fully stocked, prepared food. So it's never a situation where you're coming home and you've done the due diligence and gone shopping, but everything's raw, so you're going to have to wait 90 minutes to eat. And then if you haven't done the kitchen clean out, you're snacking on chips until the food is ready. Rather, you come home, you're hungry, you see that you've got some broccoli that's already prepared, you've got some chicken already prepared. All you need to do is throw it in the cast iron skillet with a little bit of olive oil and some tomato and some basil, and in 5 minutes you've got a nice warm meal versus having to wait 90 minutes. So it's just a matter of making it a habit, and hopefully the whole family will want to get involved. And I talk about in the book too what to do if the family's not involved or if you've got an unsupportive spouse and that sort of thing, all different sorts of social situations. But the idea is you can make it work no matter how many people you're living with, how many people are on board, how many people aren't. You can still make it work. And then finally, again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, paleo doesn't have to be an all-or-nothing approach from a financial standpoint. Again, it would be lovely if we could all have access to organic, fresh food all the time, but of course that's not the case. And the unfortunate, hard reality is that it is cheaper to eat at McDonald's several times a day versus to go to the market and get fresh fruits and vegetables. But there's some things you can do to make it more budget-friendly, like buying in bulk, being creative with your proteins. You might have planned on doing a filet mignon, but you go to the store and find out that they've got grass-fed flank steak. Different kind of meat, completely different taste, however, a lot more price-friendly. Look and see what's on special that week and buy extra and freeze it. There's no problem freezing pieces of raw fish, chicken, and meat and that type of thing. And just also being conscious of what's coming to you locally. That's going to factor into the cost. We're a bit spoiled here in Los Angeles with access to lots of different fruits and vegetables that are grown locally year-round. However, perfect example is grapes. Can I get grapes here year-round? Yes. However, if I get them in the winter, they're coming from somewhere quite far away, and they're not organic, and I'd rather wait to the small time window during the summer when I can get them from a local source. So just keeping those things in mind is quite helpful. And next slide. So the key with paleo, the takeaway is it's a permanent lifestyle change. Again, it's not a diet with an endpoint. It's not like some of these gimmicky fad diets where you do something crazy or super restrictive, but you sort of suck it up for 6 weeks and say, well, I've got that high school reunion. I've got to lose 20 pounds. I have to do it now, and I'm going to do it, and I don't care. And then the day comes, and you say, okay, I'm done starving, and you go right back to those eating habits that got you overweight or unhealthy in the first place. This is not that way. If it's done properly, the focus turns from what you're not eating to what you are eating, and the possibilities are endless. I do quite a bit of entertaining, and I don't ever feel badly when I'm not serving bread rolls or not serving pasta. And guests don't ever comment when they leave saying, oh, I was really bummed that you didn't serve any bread. Rather, they'll say things like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you got my husband to eat Brussels sprouts. And it opens the doors to lots of different people to try vegetables they might not have eaten before, try different cooking methods that they might not have thought of before. And it's a really easy way to stick to this type of diet because everything tastes so good and it doesn't feel like a traditional diet. The other thing that makes it really easy for me personally to stick with is when you identify certain foods have made you feel ill or have made you feel anything less than great, it's really an easy way to opt not to eat them anymore. A great example is if you've ever gone to a restaurant and had food poisoning. Chances are you're not going to want to order that dish from that restaurant again because it was such a clear message that it did not sit well with you. Same thing with me, and that's why when I talk about my resistance to eating gluten and I'm not interested in eating gluten, it's not at all a case of me having superhuman willpower. And the reality is, no, I don't secretly wish I was able to eat cake and cookies because I know that if I ate those things, I feel so horrible. It's just not worth it. And that's really when you can start identifying certain foods that are not paleo with feeling sick, it becomes really easy to choose not to eat them. And again, the paleo foods that we eat are abundant, delicious, and when they're followed properly, nobody's going to leave wanting anything because you're so satisfied for all the different senses. It looks beautiful, it smells beautiful, it tastes fantastic, and it satisfies you. And next slide. And again, I do touch on this in my book, Paleoista, Paleo in the Real World Social Situations. So say you've gone and you've done your months of 100% paleo at home and you've chosen to make all your meals at home and bring them to work, bring them to school, and now the reality comes and you go out for your first meal at work or your first trip. How do you do it? Well, again, it's just planning. What I recommend is continuing to do the hour in the kitchen and bringing your food with you to work or school. There's a company that I really like called Built New York, and they make the only sort of adult-friendly tote that I've seen. In other words, you can bring your food to work and it doesn't look like you've stolen your daughter's Barbie lunchbox. It's a black built neoprene stretch tote that you can pack your food in, get a couple of BPA-free plastic containers and a refreezable ice pack, and then all you need to do in the morning is choose a couple of different containers, depending on how long you're going to be away. So if you're going to be at the office all day, maybe you have 3 containers, and one container you're going to put in some of the broccoli you made along with some of the chicken and some of the avocado. And the next container might have some arugula, some wild salmon, and some olive oil. And the third container might have some kale and some beef and a little bit of coconut oil and some spices. So you see what the pattern is, and you have that with you, and you eat regularly throughout the day. your blood sugar stays level, your body's happy, your mind is clear, and it's really an easy, healthy way to eat without having to worry about it. Now, what about when you're traveling or dining out? Again, it just comes down to asking lots of questions. And I often joke about myself being sort of like the character from Harry Met Sally, where it takes me about 10 minutes to place my order at a restaurant. And that does take some getting used to, but I think it's all about the delivery. If you're pleasant with the server and ask a lot of questions, it's really easy for them to get you what you want for your meal, as well as them to receive a better gratuity. And there's plenty of situations where you wouldn't want your order to be the focus of attention. Certainly if you're in a business meeting, you don't want all eyes on you while you're giving the order that takes 10 minutes to the server. So in that situation, you can always call ahead, chat with the host, chat with the maitre d', explain you've got a food allergy, and often they'll try to accommodate. And so this is above and beyond going through the menu and just picking out the things that are obviously not paleo. Clearly you're not going to order the pasta carbonara dish, but just asking questions. Do you marinate your meat in soy sauce? Is it possible to have my salad without the croutons? That type of thing. And just the more you ask, the more it becomes the norm, and then it doesn't feel strange anymore. And again, it's all about the delivery. If you're friendly, they're going to want to help you, and it's a win-win situation. Next slide. Staying motivated. This might be a little bit easier for those of us who are athletes, because if we're athletes, we probably have a goal race or a couple of races or a season and that type of thing. Just tracking the progress and seeing how, aside from physically how our recovery is better, we're able to actually get in more quality training sessions and all these other nice little side benefits of paleo. I think it's really important to set and achieve the different goals that we have. And it's also very interesting to see how when we do this in one realm, which might be sport, I find it carries over into other areas of our life. So it might carry over into work, it might carry over into personal, and it's just a really important strategy that seems to go into different areas of our life, which are equally as important. For those of us who are doing this for weight loss goals, it's so important that we have rewards that are not food related. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients tell me things like, I lost 5 pounds, I'm going to go have an ice cream sundae. That just doesn't make sense. So set up something else for yourself that's an important goal, a reward, and then reward yourself. It might be, for the ladies, it might be a manicure. For the guys, it might be, I don't know, a night out with the guys or something like that. But just finding out something that they want to do for a reward and giving it to yourself as promised, because you're doing such a good job with your new healthy lifestyle. And then set more goals, because once you've met the first goal, obviously you want to continue to have more and continue down the healthy lifestyle path. And finally, I think, if you're concerned about the time that you might need to prepare the meals or to go shopping, yes, it's going to require a time commitment, but it's so small compared to what people think the time commitment is going to be. And the bottom line is, without our health, we're not going to be as good as we can be at anything else. So in particular, I find with clients that are moms, they'll say they don't want to take time away from the kids because they feel they're being selfish by exercising or taking care of their own eating. But the bottom line is, we have to all take care of our own health so that we're there for our families and everybody else. It's really, without our health, what have we got? And finally, just want to wrap it up with continuing education and resources. I sell a series of download plans on TrainingPeaks. And if those of you who have an account on TrainingPeaks, or if you have a coach on TrainingPeaks, it's a very simple way to get a literal how-to, what do I eat, what are the portion sizes, along with some simple preparation tips. As you know, the account on TrainingPeaks is free, and you buy a plan and it populates your account. I do also offer custom paleo lifestyle coaching. When I'm working with an athlete, I often work together with their coach and the athlete. So the athlete shares the account, I see what the workout is, and I build the meals specifically around that. So that factors in their training, any travel, races, as well as things like they've got a business dinner, so I ask them to send me the link to the restaurant they're going to so I can help them decide what to order. I also have 2 books that I've written. One that I co-wrote with Dr. Cordain, the Paleo Diet Cookbook, and my own book is Paleoista. You can buy that on ebook, also available on Amazon and all the other Barnes & Noble, different websites as paperback or hardcover. And then my website information is below, paleoista.com, as well as my social media info. And for those of you in Los Angeles area, I have my first meetup group, and in fact, we're meeting this evening. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to getting some questions.
Thank you. Yeah, we collected a handful of questions. So the first one is it possible to adopt a vegetarian or a vegan paleo diet?
Unfortunately, no, and that's a really common question, and I can speak, as I mentioned, from personal experience too. There's really no such thing as vegan paleo. What I've found has been about a really nice balance for a lot of people who are coming from a vegan background and are thinking about maybe adding some animal protein is wild fish. That was something that I introduced back into my diet as the first protein, and I was joking with in an interview I did the other day. I called it the gateway protein because I found that once I started eating wild fish and just being really conscious of the sourcing of my other proteins, I then shortly thereafter began eating also free-range poultry and grass-fed meat. So I think, unfortunately, there isn't a way to do vegan paleo, but there are some commonalities, such as making sure that we're eating enough vegetables, enough fruit, healthy fat. So what I would suggest to somebody in that situation is to read up on it and learn actually the damage you're doing by eating some of the vegan items, myself included. I didn't realize all the damage I was doing to my body by eating the soy and the tofu and the texturized vegetable protein and the legumes, which soy is a legume. So just becoming more educated and then deciding ethically if you can find the balance between maybe starting to integrate some animal protein if it's sourced humanely. And that, for me, that was how I balanced it out.
Okay, another question is, if I do a long endurance training, does it make sense not to refill carbohydrates, hoping that my body will learn how to burn fat better? Does it make sense to refill fat to force my body to burn it for lack of other fuel?
That's something that it's kind of a I feel like there's several questions in there. Yes, if you're eating carbohydrate, your body's going to use the carbohydrate versus fat. However, you wouldn't want to, in one fell swoop, go from your normal fueling routine to suddenly going for a fasted ride. So what I would recommend is adding some fasted training in short bouts and see how you feel. So maybe do a 30-minute or a 1-hour workout first thing in the morning before you eat anything. See how you feel and build up. And then if that's the case and you find your body responds well, you can actually, like you're saying, you can supplement with some fat. Sometimes I will, if I'm doing an hour and a half or 2.5-hour ride on the trainer first thing in the morning, sometimes I'll go in fasted and I will have a little bit of coconut oil as an example. So it's just being aware of the different types of substrates and making sure that you're not expecting your body to switch back and forth, because if you had bananas and yams and a whole bunch of high glycemic carbohydrates and went on a bike ride and then 30 minutes later had some fat and then another hour later had some carbohydrate gel, it wouldn't really work. So I would suggest rather just playing around with fasted training first and seeing how you're feeling.
Okay, thanks. Another one is, why shouldn't we eat legumes?
All legumes, as well as all grains, have anti-nutrient properties inherent to them. When they are growing in the ground, those properties protect them from pesticides and plants and chemicals in the soil. But the problem is that we can't actually break them down. And so they bind to other vitamins and minerals in the food we're eating and prevent us from absorbing them. And they also create, because we can't break them down, they create microscopic tearing in the intestinal wall, which starts to let the inflammation begin in the gut. And that's a condition called leaky gut. And unfortunately, it doesn't just stop in the gut. It goes throughout the whole body, creating an inflammation response. And then you can start to see infection and health issues throughout the whole body, including migraines and joint pain and chronic fatigue and skin conditions and exacerbation of autoimmune conditions, just to name a few.
Okay, thanks. I think we have time for just a couple more questions. Do you periodize your diet to match your training? For example, do you increase carbohydrates when you're training more intensely?
That's a great question. Yes, definitely diet changes. For me, it changes almost on a day-to-day or a week-to-week schedule, because if I tend to do longer, more endurance sessions on the weekend and shorter, more intense sessions during the week. And so on a Friday night, for example, when I know I've got a long ride on Saturday and a long run on Sunday, I will be sure to add some yam and starch throughout the day in small amounts, rather than the idea of stuffing your face with carbs right just the night before. So in that sense, yes, I do. I definitely factor my eating based on what training sessions are coming the next day.
Okay, this one you may have touched on earlier, but we had a couple people ask it, so it might be a good idea to review. But what can you drink during gym workouts or long runs that is paleo and supportive for the sessions?
For shorter sessions, if you're only talking about, you know, an hour and a half or something like that, you could get away with coconut water. But I would caution that if you're doing that, I wouldn't necessarily say that you don't need to add electrolyte to that, and that it would be largely dependent on somebody's sweat rate as well as the ambient conditions. So if you're somewhere really, really humid and hot and you tend to be a heavy sweater, I wouldn't say, unfortunately, that the coconut water would have enough electrolytes. It may, but you'd have to test it. So in that case, you'd probably want to have some salt tablets on hand just in case. But coconut water is something that I would recommend for sure, because coconut's got such good healing properties to it as well.
Okay, and then the last question, and this also was asked a handful of times, how would paleo nutrition strategy look like during a half Ironman race? And I know that's a really individualized question, but I think a lot of people would like to hear your perspective on how maybe you fuel for a half Ironman, or you would recommend someone to fuel for half Ironman.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, I will explain, but I also have a blog post on that exact subject where I've detailed what I eat the day before and during both half Ironman, marathon, as well as Ironman. But what I do for my breakfast smoothie is the same for all races that I've had for the last 7 years. I make a smoothie out of a really ripe banana. The fat varies. Sometimes I'll use coconut oil, sometimes raw almond butter. I use the liquid base of green tea. And then when I'm traveling, I'll use an egg powder. At home, I'll use soft-boiled eggs, because if you boil them for 6 minutes, it's a nice happy medium between a raw egg, which a lot of people are uncomfortable eating. But if you boil it for 6 minutes, it actually kills lots of the bacteria that could potentially make you very sick, and yet it's still soft enough to blend. So that'll be my smoothie, and I'll throw in a little bit of salt. I also have some leftover baked yam, and I do have black coffee in the morning. And that's what I'll have probably 3 hours before the race. And then I start my gel that I mentioned, the one non-paleo food that I have in my diet. I'll have my gel right before the race, about 5 or 10 minutes before it starts. And then I follow that ratio I mentioned of 4 calories per kilogram of body weight. I weigh 52 kilos, so I need about 2 gels an hour. So it's pretty easy to set your watch every 30 minutes for a beep and then take a gel every 30 minutes. And that's it. I find keeping it simple is so much easier. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about getting a stomach ache. A lot of people end up having sort of this hodgepodge mixture of all different types of foods to eat, and the body has more of a difficult time digesting the food as the race progresses. So if you're, at mile, almost at the end of the race, and you've been out there sweating for 6 or 7 hours, it's a lot more difficult to digest a bar than it would be to digest some liquid or a gel. So I think that's something that is a mistake that a lot of us make too. And then after the race, if it's a shorter race, and sometimes I'll make the home brew that I mentioned. But also, to be honest, sometimes at the end of an Ironman, the last thing you want is more sweet. And I sometimes just am so ready for some meat. Last year at the Hawaii Half, for example, they had a really nice display of actual food, and one of which was a burger. So it was easy enough just to get a burger with no bun and some fresh fruit, which is perfect.
Thank you. So that's all the time we have for questions today. I want to thank you, Nell, for spending this time with us and doing the webinar on this topic. Just a reminder for everyone, we are recording it, so we will be sending out an email, and it will have the link to where we put it up on YouTube. But you can also check out our webinar page, and we'll be posting it there as well. And then just a plug for a webinar we have coming up in March. We are doing one on pregnancy in athletes, and we're very excited about it. We're currently in the process of collecting data for it. So if you are a female athlete, think you'll be pregnant at some point, or you are, or you have been, definitely worthwhile registering for that webinar as well. So thank you, Nell. Great information, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks so much for having me.